Hello learners, and welcome to another session on migration. Now let us have a small recap of the session we had in the previous class. We discussed about migration and defined migration as a shift in the place of residence for some length of time. We also discussed about the different types of migration, and we talked about migration in India, which is of two types: long-term migration and short-term migration. We even discussed about the various kind of push and pull factor, what are the reasons which are pushing you out of your hometown and what is pulling you towards the place of residence or towards a place of destination for doing your either for employment or for marriage or for other reasons. We studied that, and we also understood the various patterns of migration. We also talked about and discussed the migration from the tribal areas, the point of view, and also did briefly about the determinants of migration in the previous class. Let us now continue more with migration. Now, what are the causes and consequences of migration? We have heard a lot about migration. We talked about the types of migration, the categories of migration, the push and pull factor involved in migration. What are the actual causes and consequences of migration? Let us see. Everett S. Lee has emphasized the role of pull factors or incentives associated with the destination areas. Push factors are those associated with the areas of origin, intervening obstacles such as ethnic barriers, distance, cost, and the personal factors to explain the migration of people from one area to another. Now, the pull factor includes employment opportunities in the cities, and the push factors includes labor surplus with low productivity in the rural areas, disguised unemployment, and the exploitative relationship that exists in the villages. Now, this theory has been utilized to explain the rural-urban migration in India, but it has been criticized for oversimplification of the migration analysis, as push factors can also operate in the urban areas. This goes without saying that the push factor does not necessarily happen only in the rural areas. It can also operate in the urban areas. So, a migrant looks at both the positive and negative factors at the place of origin as well as the place of destination before finally deciding to migrate. Of course, migration is not an easy task. Nobody gets up one fine day in the morning and decides, oh, I'm going to migrate. It takes a long time of processing the situation, understanding, analyzing the cost effect, and then finally coming to a decision. Now, Labor Equilibration Model by W.L. Lewis in the year around 1954 and J.C.H. Fay and G. Janis in 1964 has also tried to provide an explanation for migration. The model works on the assumption of a dual economy, that of labor attempting to move out from subsistence, low or zero productivity economy to the fast growth capitalist urban sector with higher wages. However, the critics suggest that labor productivity is not zero in the rural areas. Moreover, it is the structural factors relating to the mode of production which lead to low production rather than little work in the villages. Now, Harris and Todaro considered migration to be a function of labor allocation in response to the market demands, so that the demand and supply of labor are always in equilibrium. This we did in the previous class also. Now, you tell me as learners, if the demand is more and the supply is less, then it creates a lot of demand and the economy is burdened. Now, if the demand is less and the supply is more, then also the economy is burdened. So, we need an equilibrium in terms of the demand and supply so that everything goes on smoothly. Now, this is what happens. Now, according to this theory, labor mobility occurs in direct response to the expected wage differential between rural and urban areas. The theory further elaborates that if wage differential between the rural and urban sectors is an axis of equilibrium, the intersectoral transfer will continue until there is equality. So, the theory goes on to say that given higher wages in the urban areas, people would be attracted from low income, underdeveloped regions in numbers much larger than the available employment opportunities on the chances of getting a job. Now, the assumption of this theory is that the individual is a rational economic person interested in the maximization of profit or utility, and it is basically poor who migrate as attracted by the higher wages. The premise of this theory is on the economic factor, while the non-economic factors have not been given adequate attention. However, I would like to add here that non-economic factors are also as important as economic factors when one studies migration or when one takes up migration. Now, this theory again would fail to explain why, among the people placed in the same economic circumstances, some migrate and the others do not. We see a lot of people in the poor areas, the poorer region, some people within their region, they migrate and some do not migrate. So how do we explain that if we talk about only the poor migrating for better economic conditions? So in addition, there is a question as to why people who are well off also migrate to the cities. Now, Samuel S. Stauffer has developed the hypothesis of migration and intervening opportunities. He argued that degree of migration would be inversely related to the distance between the two places as also the extent of intervening opportunities, but directly related to the opportunities in two places. Now, Premi is another author, has thus argued that source and the destination areas are both likely to have attractive and the repulsive elements, that these will be weighed differently by different individuals. Let's say, for example, Delhi. For many people, Delhi is a place to earn better livelihood. But for many people, Delhi becomes an unsafe place. Similarly, Mumbai. For many, it becomes the capital state of India where you get to earn a lot of living, where you can do a lot of innovations. But for others, it is a very busy, complex state again. So for many people, there would be the different state or different region would be viewed or weighted differently because every individual thinks differently. Now, J. Clyde Mitchell has theorized the idea in a more comprehensive way. He has stated that a single factor explanation of migration is totally inadequate and that listing all possible motivation is also not very useful. He has seen the need to link together and has related the multiple causes in a logical framework and suggested a classification whose major headings are, in quote unquote, let me tell you, the nexus of a centrifugal tendencies, quote close, and the nexus of the centripetal tendencies, subdivided by social, psychological and economic factors. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say for a person, shifting from the place of birth to another place could be as simple as or even as silly as going behind a friend. Or for some people, it could be as simple and as complex as looking for a better, higher income than what they are getting. So, you cannot just define or start listing in bullet points like A, B, C, these are the reasons why people migrate, and A, B, C, these are the reasons why people don't migrate. So, when you talk about the push and the pull factor, there are a reason which pushes you from your place of birth, and there are certain reasons which pulls you to the place of destination or the place of migration. Now, this push and pull factor would be very complex for some, very simple for some, very important for some, and very silly for some. So, different people have different reasons to migrate. Now, Premi has identified employment, income, and rapid population growth as the three key variables which determine the extent and pattern of the migration flows. Migrants flow from areas where employment opportunities are stagnant, income is low, and rate of population growth is high. Conversely, they are attracted to the areas of new industrial development, regions of higher per capita income, and the areas where the disparity between birth and death rate is also low. Rao also at the same time pointed out that isolated variables cannot adequately explain the reason for migration. Hence, he has taken the multidimensional approach for the analysis of migration. In this way, Rao has identified the following key factors in the multidimensional approach. Now, the first one would be historical development of the region, wider economic and political condition which regulates and condition the nature of employment opportunities. Another one would be economic and social condition in the place of origin. At the individual level, level of skills, family circumstances, process of socialization and the personality factors, and presence of the resource network such as social network, which is definitely very important, which acts as the most effective channel of communication that favors decision making in migration. Now, having talked about these causes, what are the consequences of migration? The consequences of migration is no less important. The consequences of migration may be analyzed in the framework of changes at the place of destination and changes at the place of origin. Now, the impact of migration on the people at the place of destination can be analyzed in the following dimension, namely, number 1, wage discrimination and exploitation, number 2, sexual harassment, number 3, vulnerable migrant child or girl in particular, and number 4, destruction of culture, kin network and social relations. The impact of migration on tribals has not always been positive. Of course, how can it be positive when you are being forced to move from your place of residence involuntarily for reasons unknown to you? Then it could not be a positive migration. For instance, the tribal in Western India have suffered a lot due to migration, and the women and children are the worst affected. It is a fact that these tribal people have been denied the basic human rights. Now, tribal women who migrate to the urban centers for employment in the lean seasons face several problems. It could be physical abuse, it could be verbal abuse, it could be vulnerability, it could be looking for a better situation or better conditions of stay. It could be a whole lot of reasons. Now, the tribal women mainly work on the construction sites on the basis of daily wages, and most of the wages are not equal. The men gets better pay and the women get lesser pay. Now, the study has demonstrated that minimum wages for the tribal men and women are not uniform, and tribal women are both sexually and economically exploited. Moreover, presence of infant children obstruct the tribal women economic participation because she has to divide her time between looking after the infant child and working. So, if you are paid on the basis of hourly work, like every hour you get a payment, then of course 2 to 3 hours get wasted in looking after the infant or feeding the infant and changing the infant or whatever reason it is. So, you are not able to give your 8 hours of work as compared to other people. Now, the tribal migrants face problems in terms of poor working conditions and living conditions. Its impact widened far into the future of their dependents also. Now, migration leads to an increase in both employment opportunities and income, but at the same time, vulnerability increases, which may vary according to the types of migration. And this vulnerability would be dependent on the kind of person that you are, whether you're a woman or a male, a child or a youth, depending on the kind of the situation. So, some of the problems faced by migrants are linked to faulty urban planning as well. Now, as a result of shift to the urban areas, tribal women suffer from cultural as well as knowledge and are unable to adjust to the individualistic life pattern in such areas. It may be added here that women enjoy relatively high social status in the tribal societies. Now, tribal women are the main decision makers in the household work and partial decisions makers in the activities related to agriculture and livestock or poultry. But tribal women do not take part in any kind of political decision. However, the shift to the urban areas for employment reduces the status of women in the families as they lack awareness of the new working environment, credit facilities, market and savings. Now, the illiteracy of the tribal women, along with lack of any technical knowledge, has completely removed women from the decision-making process in the family and made them completely dependent on the menfolk. Women in such circumstances suffer from being uprooted from their traditional locale and milieu and face a sense of socio-psychological insecurities at the same time. Now, the impact of migration on the people at the place of origin can be analyzed on the following dimension, namely, number one, effect of male migration, improvement in the socio-economic condition of the family, but increased burden on the women. The male migrates, if I have to explain this statement, the male migrates, and so what happens is it is left to the women to take care of the household, to take care of the various situations and happening within the household, and so she becomes more and more burdened because there's no one to share the responsibility with. Now, second is effect of female migration. There is an improvement in the socio-economic condition of the family and position of women in the family as well as in the community. Now, Rao and Kumar in 1997, while highlighting the impact of migration on the women folk, pointed out that the male migration actually enhances both physical and financial burdens on the women in terms of overwork leading to poor health and indebtedness. In the absence of male, women have the sole responsibility to look after the children, the cattle, doing the household chores, looking after the old parents. So this is what we just discussed. Now further, the cash remittances from the male members are irregular and the need to run the household on a daily basis till such time as cash remittances arrives put additional burden on a woman. As a result, women have to look for jobs as the wage labor in the surrounding villages, which puts her at risk of physical and economic exploitation of the outsiders. Now, having discussed all the points, one can only suggest that migration can help reduce poverty or halt the slide into poverty. It also helps tighten rural labor markets, and there are, however, many negative impacts of migration also, like loss of identity, culture, security, acute shortage of labor and high dependency ratios in sending areas. But at the same time, having said that, as compared to the negative impacts, we have the positive impacts also, such as increased livelihood, better standard of living, better economic facilities, and increased self-dependency or becoming self-dependent. Now, mass male migration can lead to worsening poverty. People who are away for a long time may lose access to natural resources and also lose their voice in community decision making. Because if you're a person who has migrated and is staying in the place of destination for a long period of time, the community people, whenever there's a function or there's a decision to be taken, you tend to lose your voice because you are not considered to be a part of that community any longer because your absence has been found to be too long. Now, before we end the session, let us have a brief recap of what we have done in today's session. We discussed the causes and consequences of migration where we began the session, and we touched upon the various issues related to migration. We also highlighted the problems faced by the tribal migrants and how vulnerability increases according to the types of migration and according to the types of gender. We also mentioned the issues faced by women migrants in the place of destination. Now, having said all this, let us sum up about this, the course that we just studied, or the topic about migration as well as displacement. Now, the session of all the sessions that we've had regarding displacement and migration has attempted to highlight the characteristics, features of displacement and migration and their interrelationship. These are sociological phenomena, although some of them are voluntary and others involuntary. Now, this session highlights lacunae of the government policies regarding rehabilitation and resettlement. There are inner contradictions in those policies. The victims do not have any participation in the decision-making process when it comes to displacement. Now, there is also a close relationship between displacement and migration, which can be derived from the sessions that we all have if you have been listening carefully. Now, displacement is one of the many factors responsible for forced migration. There are many patterns of migration which has been dealt with in the session. Apart from the causes of migration, the consequences of migrations have also been analyzed. These consequences have social, cultural, economic, social and psychological implication. With this, we end our session on displacement and migration, and I do hope that you all had a good learning experience. Thank you.